Have you ever lost hope that you cannot solve your anxiety problem? Chronic anxiety, anxiety that goes on and on and on throughout our entire life. What are we supposed to do about it? Should we just do more mindfulness, more meditation, take more medication, double down in one of these different paths? Today, I'm going to tell you a different way, a more complete way, a deeper way to completely solve chronic anxiety problems fully for life. My name is Paul Wood. This is Exploring Anxiety. I suffer from anxiety for a massively long time, decades of my life. And over the past 14 years, I've been a coach and therapist helping people to solve their anxiety problems. But weirdly, sometimes with anxiety, the more videos you watch and the more you learn and the more books you read, the more confused you get about what you are actually supposed to do to solve this problem on a deep level. So the path that you probably tried so far to solve your anxiety is the technique-based path of you doing something like mindfulness meditation, therapy, some sort of cognitive type technique or method to try and reduce your anxiety. But the conflict is this: most of those things are not really dealing with the cause of our anxiety. So they're actually reducing our anxiety, fighting against the cause, and perhaps if we do enough of those things, our anxiety reduces. So one of the main problem with all technique-based approaches to anxiety is that it works, but it works in quite a functional way over a kind of 10-11 week period, which is how anxiety interventions are measured by scientists. But it doesn't really help us who experience chronic anxiety. It doesn't help the people who have suffered from anxiety for literally decades of their life. Yeah. And we can't just keep doing these techniques every single day mindlessly, because most of us are going to fail at that. Most of us are not going to do that. And most of us at times are going to experience anxiety that's so strong that the techniques just do not cut the mustard and are not strong enough to actually combat it in any way. So today I want to talk to you about a completely different approach to anxiety that's not like anything that you've recognized before. It's really going to connect the dots for you in your life. It's going to show you how every single little thing has contributed towards your anxiety and the very reason why you have not been able to resolve it. So firstly, what is anxiety? Anxiety is simply stress which builds up to the point we lose resilience, where our brain loses its ability to bounce back to recover from stress. And the moment that red line is passed and we experience anxiety, anxiety is self-reinforcing. So it could be self-reinforcing from the physical symptoms we have. We feel anxious enough that we focus on them too much, we feel uncomfortable, and it goes on and on and on. It could be self-reinforcing from the problems in our life. We feel anxious, stress builds up. We start focusing on the way we're failing, the way we're not doing well, the problems we have, the issues we have, and constantly start ruminating, thinking about those things. We start doubling down in different ways to cope with it. We perhaps drink more, or eat more, or work more, but we do something that's kind of oppositional to distract ourselves, but doesn't actually solve the reason or the problem that we have. So anxiety is simply a chronic underlying stress that builds up to the point we can't cope with it, and it creates anxiety. So for most people that experience chronic anxiety throughout most or perhaps on and off all of their life, the question is this: what is creating this chronic stress? What is creating this underlying stress that we generally do not recognize that we have, but is always there, leading to us being much more vulnerable, much more easily able to be triggered and feel anxious than the average person is. Another person similar to us might just walk through life and not feel any anxiety at all, but we experience so much of it. Why is that? It's so confusing, isn't it? So as I look back over my life and the times that I experienced anxiety, the first time I ever experienced anxiety was when I moved high school when I was 12 years old. Not a good time to start a new high school, is it? Where you don't know anyone in the entire school. But anyway, I was moved from one area to another, started high school, didn't know any kids at all, and I just completely failed. So I just felt so overwhelmed, so anxious. I didn't have the confidence, the social skills to make new friends, to developmentally face all the challenges. So what happened is that I failed completely. So I failed to thrive. I wasn't able to then cope with the new environment, so I felt stressed. And as I felt stressed over a period of weeks and months, I then began to feel anxious. And as I felt anxious, I then became more introverted in myself, ruminate more, become more hyper paranoid about what was wrong, what I shouldn't do, this, that, problems, getting bullied. and just literally made myself more and more anxious. So stress created the anxiety, and then my reaction to it made it self-reinforcing. So I ruminated, kept thinking about problems, issues, and that became the fundamental foundation for my anxiety throughout all of my life. But the main issue is this: when we're suffering, we just want to alleviate that suffering. And when we have anxiety affects us in so many different ways. But the way that we see, the way we experience, the way that's meaningful to us is simply the feeling of anxiety. So we feel anxious. We hate the feeling, the horrible anxiety feeling that it creates. But anxiety isn't just a feeling. But the problem is when we just focus on the feeling, from our perspective, if the feeling's there, we're anxious. If the feeling's gone, we're not anxious. And this is what tricks us when we have chronic anxiety, because it took me a long, long time to figure out. But what I found was, so that wasn't my anxiety. So the feeling of anxiety wasn't actually the anxiety I had. Yeah. That even when I didn't feel anxious, I was an anxious person. And this was the bitter pill to swallow. And every single day over the past 14 years when I've helped people at my anxiety centre, I've seen that the people who come and see me with chronic anxiety conditions as I had, it's not about if they feel anxious or not, but they're always transfixed on wanting to let go of the feeling, feel less anxious, which makes complete sense. But let's look at it on a deeper level. The number one way which anxiety affects us chronically over the long term is behaviorally. It's not emotional, it's behavioral. Yep, in terms of anxiety, we've all heard of the kind of fight, flight, and freeze. And we all understand that if someone attacks me with a knife, I might freeze, I might flee. And these are instinctive patterns to keep me safe. But what we don't consider is this: if we feel chronically stressed, if we feel chronically anxious for much or all of our life, we are continuously activating one of those three patterns unconsciously, literally all the while. And then this pattern becomes the very blueprint for which we live our life. We've moved away from the normal developmental path that was balanced and that worked for us, worked for our brain mentally, emotionally, and behaviorally. And we've then become overwhelmed by this blueprint of keeping us safe and keeping us alive. So that even if we don't feel the feeling of anxiety for a month or even a year, people who have chronic anxiety are always following this blueprint. And this blueprint, by definition, is one that tells our brain we're stressed. As we follow it, as we react to it, as we think in those ways, as we walk that path, it's continuously spiking our stress response and always making us much more vulnerable to developing anxiety. So let's go through those three patterns. Number one, someone could be reacted in a fight way, which a simple way to look at that is someone who perhaps is really working really hard in their career and doing really well, but is chronically stressed all the while, is not focusing on their mood, they're perhaps leaning in the direction of depression, their relationships are never good, they're not taking care of themselves. So it's an imbalanced way where their brain is obsessively doing one thing because that's how they reacted to their childhood and developmentally the experiences they had. Number two and number three are fairly similar, which is freeze and flee, which is where someone just begins to shut down, just begins to stop, just begins to accept sameness over change or improvement because sameness is more comfortable, and we just feel much more scared of anything new and anything different. This could be someone who's still working a minimum wage job at age 30, 40 or 50, and despite being clever, bright, capable, with potential, cannot move forward in their life. Yeah. Freeze is the clear sign of that, where someone perhaps developmentally isn't good at relationships, isn't good at taking care of themselves, isn't good at taking care of their body, perhaps they were overweight from a young age, or isn't good at developing a career, and they just shut down. And you look over the past 20 years and they just have not moved forward at all, and they don't know why. If you ask them why, they want to, clearly anyone would, but why have they not been able to? Because this overarching pattern has been the fundamental way their brain has been operating from a young age, and they've never considered that that is the thing that needs to change. Same as flee. Someone could be running away from relationships, running away from this, running away from that, being avoidant in all kinds of different ways, but they don't consider that isn't just about the way they feel. This is a behavioral pattern that's far deeper and something they're intrinsically following all the while. So as you look back over your life and you see that there's things you've wanted, things that are meaningful, things that are important to you, ways you've wanted to grow and change and develop, but you have not been able to, ultimately, this is really the key problem. that the way you are living, the style of life you are living, the way you are walking through the world is being 100% dictated and controlled by this fundamental blueprint, this overarchingly dictating how you think and how you make decisions in your life. And because you're following that path, it's always creating stress, chronically wearing you down, to the point where you're much more vulnerable to anxiety, where your mental health is much more vulnerable, and life cannot just flow easily. When you're free of anxiety, you'll move away from the instinctive, stressful, reactive blueprints that have controlled or dictated or influenced much of your life. And you'll be in a position for the very, very first time where you are feeling good, feeling relaxed, feeling at ease, feeling comfortable in yourself, and growing easier than it's ever been before, where all areas of your life are beginning to improve in balance with each other. That is the goal, to recognize behaviorally how this blueprint is literally messed up or destroyed or capped or influenced or glass ceilinged our growth, and being able to recognize that that isn't normal, that's not natural. I may have had the tendencies to freeze, to fight, to flee, but that is not who I ultimately am.